Welcome to the Wisdom of Women show. We are dedicated to amplifying the voice of women in business. A new model of leadership is emerging, and we are here to amplify the voices of women leading the way. I am your host, Coco Sellman, five-time founder, impact investor, and creator of the Force for Good system. Thank you for joining us today as we illuminate the path to unlocking opportunities and prosperity for women-led enterprises by amplifying the voice and wisdom of women. So today I have a brilliant new friend that I recently got to spend some time with in Chicago, and she is a master of helping people articulate their voice, to be able to bring their voice to the center. So Allison Shapira is a keynote speaker, former opera singer, best-selling author, and global expert in leadership communication. Since 2003, she has developed programs inside Fortune 50 companies, government agencies, and nonprofits, advising leaders from prime ministers, folks, to CEOs on strengthening their communication for positive change. Allison brings 2 decades of experience to each engagement, helping leaders become empowered communicators who transform organizations from the inside out. Integrating breakthrough AI tools for practical frameworks equip audiences to speak with impact. And that is also the name of her brilliant book, Speak with Impact. An adjunct lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School since 2014, Allison has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and Harvard Business Review. Serious stuff. Wow. Allison is an expert in leadership communication who offers all kinds of great stuff, keynotes, one-on-one advisory, and group programs for organizations around the world. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you, Coco. What a treat to be with you.
Oh, it's so great to be with you. I was enjoying over the last couple of days visiting your website and listening to your talks, your keynotes, and learning about your voice around leadership and impact. So I'm so excited to be here with you today. So as we get started, what I always want to begin with is, what is a book written by a woman that has significantly influenced your life?
A book that's significantly influenced my life, especially over the past year, has been the book Quit: The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away by Annie Duke. And I was so inspired, I read her next book about decision making as well.
Tell us about this book, Quit.
It's about reframing what quitting is, because we have such a negative connotation of quitting. You're stopping something. Overall, as entrepreneurs in the business world, a quit has a very negative connotation. And this book is about the power of knowing when the current course no longer serves you or others, and when a redirection is going to lead to a better outcome for you or others. It was reframing the benefit of quitting. And one particularly powerful component for me is that when you're in the throes of trying to make a decision, it's actually too late to think clearly about that decision. The best time to think about making that decision is before you need it. And it's going to feel like it's too soon, like everything's going well. That's the best time to change direction.
Oh my goodness, that's brilliant, right? Like you don't wait till the wolves are at your heels.
That's exactly it.
Right. So I love it. I'll pick this book up. It's by Annie. What was the last name?
Duke, Duke.
Duke. Great. All right. That's great. Well, tell us now more about Speak with Impact and what that means to you. How do you help leaders get out there, overcome their fears, and speak with confidence?
The more senior the leaders I work with, the more they tell me how 50, 60, 80% of their day is spent communicating the messages of the organization, which means how you communicate is how you lead. And that's where I like to focus on helping leaders, because how we communicate starts with how we feel about ourselves. We have to inspire ourselves first before we can then inspire others. So whether I'm working with a leader one-on-one or a group through a keynote, it starts by looking within to determine for each person, why am I called to lead? And harnessing our sense of purpose as a grounding force that then helps us communicate effectively. And that's what I love to do with my work.
That is so cool. So, and this you talk about a lot in your book, which I have right here. It's about why me? Why am I the leader? And what's the reason why I'm coming here to speak on this behalf? Talk a little bit about purpose and vision and this concept that a leader needs to bring to the table within an organization.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that concept, the why me, or the way I phrase it is why you, but then you interpret it again as why me, looking inward. It's not why are you qualified? Why are you the best person to deliver this speech? Those are external validators. Why do you care about the work you do and the people you represent? And when was a moment in your life that made you care? When you answer those questions and really dive deep into your sense of purpose, your why you is not to increase shareholder value. It's deeper, it's more powerful. And the story that you connect with reminds you that your right to speak comes from within. Once you answer those questions, it grounds you in your authenticity, because you're no longer trying to play the role of the leader that you think everyone expects of you. Your authenticity becomes one of your most powerful communication tools, because it helps you harness authentic emotion and real language as opposed to jargon or acronyms that has a much powerful motivating presence and impact on your audience. So the why me, that why you statement really is the cornerstone of what I teach in every situation, because it becomes the foundation upon which every other part of our leadership is built.
So I'm curious, Allison, because you've been doing this work for a long time and at a very professional, successful level. What is your reason? What gets you up and motivates you every day to work with leaders and to get on stage and do keynotes?
Appreciate that you asked that, because so often when you do this work continuously, especially if you're a keynote speaker and you're sharing the same stories and keynotes all around the world, how do you keep those stories fresh, where it might be new for your audience, but it's not new for you delivering it? And the mantra that I repeat to myself before every presentation, I go into the restroom, I look at myself in the mirror, and I say to myself, I'm going to be the voice that one person needs to hear today.
Hmm.
And it's based on this belief that these messages will change people's lives. Often we don't hear them, or they're not delivered in a way that we're ready to hear. When people hear those messages, it touches them in a very personal place that then becomes an inspirational force where they inspire themselves so that they can then inspire others. And I have people come up to me after events to say, that was the voice I needed to hear today.
Well, I love that. And I love that you've had this purpose all along and that this is continuous. I think there's a common thread for great leaders where they have a real clear, consistent purpose. What you just told me made me think about great leaders of organizations, and you work with lots of executives, founders, and CEOs. They're going around repeating themselves, even if it's to the same audience, right? Because if you're the founder, you're the leader, you're the one who's creating that narrative. And I think that's a huge opportunity to transform people's lives, right?
It also becomes more challenging the more senior you become and the larger your company becomes, because you start to have other people weigh in on those messages. At a certain level, your executive comms team is handing you these messages. I'll work with executives where they're about to deliver their town hall and they get these messages from their executive comms team and they're like, well, this is not how I talk. If you just read what's written for you, then you sound like a talking head and it creates a barrier between you and your audience. So what I do with a lot of senior executives when they have a whole team preparing the message is I work with them to humanize the message so that their stories, their language, their phrasing, their cadence comes out. Even if the legal department said you had to phrase certain messages this way, sure, trust legal, but also add in some of those personal components so that you ensure that it's actually you speaking as opposed to just your role speaking.
Beautiful. And say more because I know this is another big theme in your book, and it's an area that I personally want to get better at is storytelling. Like the art of storytelling and why it's so important.
It's been important our entire lives throughout human history. Storytelling has been a way in which we've educated, taught, connected, guided one another. Yes, it's a buzzword, and it's still critical as leaders that we use it, regardless of whether it's a buzzword or not. Storytelling is important for three reasons. The first being stories are more memorable. When I read off a list of facts, you probably won't remember them. If I tell you a story, you are exponentially more likely to remember the story, which means you'll remember the message. The second reason stories are important is because they activate your audience's brains in ways that facts just do not. If I talk about the scent of lavender, when I walked through the lavender fields in Croatia, the part of your brain that processes smell is activated. It changes the engagement of your brain, which leads to the third reason that stories are powerful. And that's that they also engage your emotions as well. So if I tell you an emotional story, even if you weren't there, your brain starts to produce oxytocin, which is a chemical that creates a feeling of trust and connection. So I neurologically connect with you and you to me through telling stories. So anytime an executive is thinking, how do I engage my audience? It's stop talking about the facts. I mean, yes, include the numbers and the statistics. And then every so often say, let me step back and give you an example of this in action. And that's what makes those stories memorable.
Great. And so your book is Speak with Impact. And I know that your message is so much about the concept of making a particular point, actually having impact. Tell us more about what impact, what do you mean by impact? How do you know after a talk or a communication, whether if you've created impact?
Impact takes many forms. In
Yes.
my introduction, you clearly said positive impact because impact can be negative as well. What does impact look like? An impact of something is a physical mark. The crater, a crater is an impact that a meteor has had on the ground. It's something memorable or marked that lasts. And so when we think
Mm.
about how do we as leaders make an impact, it means how do we do something that produces a tangible change for the better? Is that tangible change a feeling that your audience has of connection? If your
Right.
audience feels that connection with you, then perhaps it's the chemical reaction that is that impact. And then, even better, do they take action based on what you said? So they don't just smile and nod when you're talking about the new direction of the company or talking them through this time of uncertainty and change as they worry about AI and their jobs. Can your words actually have a positive impact on job performance, on productivity? Does it have a measurable impact on employee satisfaction and engagement. That's what we mean by impact.
Brilliant. So I'm wondering if you could share with us perhaps an example of this, because I think great leaders are impactful, right? They're able to bring their organizations through evolution and growth and change and transformation. So all day long, we need to be, as leaders, founders, creating impact. So I'm curious, just so we can all like ground ourselves in something tangible, a time that you work with somebody where you really helped them, they needed to make a change in their organization, or some change was happening in the world and they needed to make a change and have a new outcome come about. Is there an idea or a story you could tell around that?
Yes, I can think of a specific example. And it also talks about a counterintuitive component of leadership communication, which is when not to talk. There's when to talk and there's when to stay silent. I'll never forget, this was a senior leader I was working with within a large organization. And this individual was tasked with moving into a new leadership role over a group that had just been publicly chastised by someone else within that organization. This leader is now responsible for leading this new group, raising their morale, and bringing them together to productively confront the issue for which they had been called out. This person came to me for coaching to write a speech to address that audience. A lot of leaders, I'll work with them on their introduction speech. They've just stepped into this new leadership role, and now they want to show up as that leader, but also show up as themselves. And they're still figuring out what it means to be that leader. This person came to me to write the speech. They wanted help crafting the message. And I said, what's the solution to this challenge? The leader said, I don't know. It's going to take some time and we have to talk to people. I said, if you show up and introduce yourself as this person who's going to come in and magically solve their problem, you're going to face a trust barrier because they're going to know that you don't know enough about them in order to solve their problem for you. And you just admitted you can't. So rather than crafting a speech, I'm going to help you craft a conversation starter, a 2-minute opening statement that acknowledges what's on their mind, the discomfort they've faced, the unfairness of the situation that they faced, demonstrates a belief in them that they can overcome this, and a recognition that they have more pieces of the puzzle than this leader does. And instead of coming in with a solution, this leader wants to come in and hear from them so that they can together solve the challenge. That's an important message for leaders because we think we have to come in and swoop in and solve everyone's problems. When we're able to tap into the wisdom of the people we lead, then they feel more buy-in with the solution because they were part of it.
That's incredibly valuable for all of us because we do get stuck feeling like we have to come up with all the answers as leaders. The better goal is to find a way to embody and bring out all of the wisdom from our teams. So that's a great example of how to help somebody bring forth their own answers in a difficult situation. Through your journey as an entrepreneur and as a public speaker, what are some of the lessons that you've learned about leadership? And what advice would you give to women founders aiming to improve their communication skills and grow their businesses?
I am still learning lessons about leadership, and I am still imperfect in my application of those lessons. I have to acknowledge that I teach people to not be perfect, to embrace their authenticity. On a program I did once, somebody used the term flawsome. We want to be flawsome. And I loved that. And yet I still struggle with it. I'm still a perfectionist. And I mean, down to adding punctuation consistently to bullet points in an email. Yes, I'm the CEO and I'm tweaking that. Well, if someone were to be more consistent, I wouldn't have to tweak it. But I'm so perfectionist in those ways. Is that helpful? Probably not. And so it's always a balance understanding when is the time for 100% and when is the time to acknowledge that 70% is pretty great. And also to trust the contributions of other people on your team, because there have been times where somebody asked me a question and I was about to respond. And then I paused and said, well, what do you think? What would you do? And their answer was better than what I was going to say.
We like to talk, right? We like to have the answers. I think that's really wise. Leadership is always growing. What are some hard challenges that you faced growing your company? What are some of the moments? Because you've really, I want to ask you two questions. One is, how did you do it? You don't end up with a business as established as yours, doing the kind of work you do just by chance. And I imagine that in that growth process, you also endured some real challenges. If you could tell us about your growth story, I would love to hear those stories.
The first part of the story is fascinating because I started the business through process of elimination, not with the intent to start a business. I had just left one job to take another, a safe job that would have doubled my salary and given me financial independence for the first time in my life. Based on a gut feeling on the third day in the job, I wound up turning it down. I hadn't signed the contract yet, but I'd already started. And I turned it down with no backup and started exploring other opportunities, and nothing felt right. I've always in my life not necessarily been guided by where I want to go to, but a very clear direction of where I'm not going to go. And so through process of elimination, nothing else worked. And finally I said, you know what? I've had this side business teaching communication. Why don't I see if I can do that full time and make it my sole source of income? And it turned out to be the best decision I could have ever made. And now there's nothing else I can see myself doing than this path, focusing on helping leaders communicate with power and presence. It was the last thing I tried. The part of the origin story is really interesting for people who might not have the immediate vision. The vision might come after a few years of working at it.
Right. You were already doing it, but how did you get to the point where now you're working with Fortune 50 companies? Go on your website, I can see you've got big rooms filled with people and travel around the world. You met with all kinds of important, significant people. So how did you grow? How did you get from doing your first 10 or 20 person room to now having hundreds of people in the room?
It happened through a lot of pounding the pavement. When I moved to DC to the company, I set a goal of 2 networking coffees per day, every single day of the week. And I kept that pace for 2 years. So there was a relentless reaching out to anyone I had ever met, not asking for business, but asking for advice on how my skills would be valuable in their industry. And through the strength of those conversations, advice turned to business. That first year, I did a lot of free programs. I taught for free to whoever was willing to listen. And it was so interesting how one of those pro bono programs led to a low bono program, a low paid program with a corporate sponsor. And the corporate sponsor of that nonprofit organization heard me speak and came up to me after and said, do you do corporate training? And I said, what any entrepreneur in my position would have said, which is, of course, I would be happy to do corporate training. Very often, at least in my field, we say yes, as long as we know we have the skill set. We might not have the program, we have the skill set. So we say yes, and then we build the program. And that led to the beginning of a 10-year partnership with that organization that has expanded to multiple lines of business and other organizations. People leave one place, go to the next one, and they have their new strategy and they want a keynote speaker and they remember me, or they're moving into a new role at a new company and they want help. What I like about that is we never know where our opportunity is going to come from. It's not the traditional route of trying to get in front of that big company. You may not be able to, but by helping others, you might be in a position where the companies that you want to notice you do notice you. So it shows this holistic ecosystem that exists around us.
The other thing I want to point out is you were so consistent. Like that to me is one of the marks of success. I'm going to do 2 of these every day. Your flywheel will start to spin one way or the other. You're going to get better at whatever it is that you're doing twice a day or 5 times a day or 5 times a week. That important action ultimately will create a result, a new result. How has that evolved for you? I know you a little bit. We're both in strategic coach together. I know that you are a disciplined, hardworking person. What kinds of disciplines, habits, rituals do you have in your life today, or does your company have in its structure today, that make sure you continue to thrive and move forward as a company?
I have my own personal disciplines. For instance, in the morning, the way I prepare to go to work is I do some sort of exercise for 30 minutes, whether it's a run outside or treadmill, not treadmill, but an elliptical machine inside, and I listen to a podcast. And it's usually these days an artificial intelligence podcast, or maybe neurotechnology or quantum computing. And so what I'm doing is I'm waking up my body and my mind concurrently. By the time I get to the office, I'm ready to go. And whatever podcast I listen to already has my brain spinning with ideas, even if it has nothing to do with my work. The quantum computing podcast gave me some analogous idea that I can implement. And what I have come to recognize is if I don't start my morning with those 2 elements, I'm not as inspired and I'm not as effective. So that's part of my own preparation.
Mm-hmm. So for all the founders listening, I think it is great advice to find a way for you to start your day. That morning ritual is a common thread for people who are able to have a glorious life, a productive life, a successful life. Tell us about your services and how you work with clients and how you might be able to support the founders listening today.
There are a few different ways in which I help people. On the larger scale, it's being able to share a message of how do you communicate with authenticity and purpose every single day. So it could be a keynote on a topic like lead with your voice. How do you use your voice in the exercise of leadership? And I might sing a little opera at the end of that keynote as a way to convey a message of authenticity over perfection. Or it could be about how could AI make us more authentic, not less? How can AI tap into our authenticity as opposed to becoming a barrier or a crutch? So those are the topics that I'm talking about on stage so that everyone in the audience can think about how can I get more involved with AI in the right way? And then how do I leave this room in order to connect more effectively with my team, with my clients, with external stakeholders? So that's the keynote component of how I help people. On a more personal level, it would be working with individual leaders who are either new in their role or preparing for a new role. Usually there's the sweet spot of the C-suite's direct reports or their direct reports. I call it's too deep from the C-suite within that space, where these are individuals who really know what they're talking about. They have subject matter expertise, but they may not have the presence to step into those leadership roles. Or founders who've come from one industry and are going into another, they haven't given themselves permission to recognize how much confidence, credibility, and power they do have, and they have to reframe it in this new role or industry.
Those are great ways to think about it. So for keynotes or for helping us own our confidence in a new role or in a new industry, or just being able to articulate to the team whatever it is that you're trying to lead. I also think about pitches, right? Whether it's a sales pitch or a pitch to a prospective funder, I'm sure that's always an important speech to give.
Absolutely. It's definitely something that I help people with. I want them to recognize, though, that their public speaking skills don't sit on a shelf and then get taken out for the pitch.
Right.
I define public speaking as anytime you speak with one person or more with some goal. So, my goal for them is to be able to use these skills every day in a meeting, a presentation, a pitch, a town hall, or a TED talk, but to recognize every single day they can lead with their voice.
Do you help people get ready for TED Talks?
I have worked on some TED Talks. I've delivered a TEDx talk, still working on getting my own big TED talk. Hopefully that will come in the near future.
Oh, that's so cool. That's one of my goals is a TEDx and then maybe a TED someday, right? One more question. Tell us about your opera background and how that has influenced your whole career.
Opera was my first career path. That's what I studied at a performing arts high school and later went to college to pursue. What I learned through that process is that I didn't like the politics and the industry around opera, and I wound up leaving the field, but then realizing that everything I learned as a singer actually made me a very effective speaker and an even better coach. Because as a singer, I could harness my voice and my breath support in order to both protect my voice and then project my voice across the room. I had to learn the speech writing influence and persuasion that opera singers don't learn, but the nonverbal communication I knew. And then as singers, when we're not performing, we're critiquing other singers. So I had developed a very analytical ear and eye to pick up on the subtle shifts in someone's voice, tone, or posture that influenced the quality of their sound and the way they were perceived. And that's exactly what we want to be aware of as leaders when we're communicating, so there's no disconnect between what we say and how we say it.
Wow. And so I'm thinking about too how much as you work with a client, how vulnerable really they are and how vulnerable we all are when we're learning something and having somebody give us feedback. How do you help people with that?
It's very important that I create a safe space where they feel comfortable sharing those vulnerabilities. It's a space that some people don't even feel in therapy, or they'll say it feels like therapy, because how we communicate is tied to how we feel about ourselves, the value of our contributions, whether they're validated by others or not. It's very personal, it's very deep and vulnerable. And so my goal is to make someone feel comfortable trusting me, which means confidentiality is critical. And then to give them a space to talk about these issues so that we can reframe them in a different way. And then they can practice in that safe space before they go out in front of the stakeholders, before they go out in front of their team or the funders. They've had that chance to get their reps in a safe space.
It's beautiful. Really, really powerful. I'm moved and inspired by the work you do. I believe you really help people because you are giving them that safe space to grow. It's not just the speech or the pitch. It really is that deeper growth that comes from being willing to be vulnerable and change. It's awesome. So, how can our listeners get in touch with you? What's a good way for them to have a taste of your message?
I invite everyone listening or watching to visit my website, AllisonShapira.com. You'll know how to spell that because you'll see my name on the episode. You'll see it here. It's also on the video. So my name, AllisonShapira.com. They can sign up and get a free download of the first chapter of my book, Speak with Impact, please connect with me on LinkedIn. We can talk that way. I post frequently. I share videos and tips when I have a client conversation and it gives me an insight. I'll share that insight, certainly not with the name of the client, but I'll share an insight that's sparked in my brain that I think all of us should be aware of. So I would send them to my website and then to connect with me on LinkedIn.
I really enjoyed reading your book, and I'm learning and thinking about how I can integrate all that I've gathered from you, and I'm sure I'll have opportunity to talk to you more about it as the days and weeks go on. I'll see you in a couple weeks in Chicago for a strategic coach. But it's just, I hope everybody listening, if you think about how you would want to empower a more clear voice and bring more clarity to what you're communicating to your teams, customers, and community. I hope you'll pick up the Speak with Impact book, go to Allison's website and get the first chapter for free. Thank you, Allison, for joining us today on the Wisdom of Women show. Thank you for illuminating the path to unlocking opportunities for growth and prosperity for women-led enterprises. We value your experience and wisdom. And if you, as a listener, enjoyed our time together, please be sure to follow, like, and share the Wisdom of Women show. Please be sure to visit Allison's LinkedIn profile and her website to infuse more wisdom into your business. Take the Growth Readiness Quiz at